It was a sad day for certain, as two of the most prominent members of the Galactic Council, the Mariana and the Grekta, were at each other's throats over some sort of territorial dispute. Not only that, but there was some sort of other inner turmoil that others did not understand. However, the subtext in their speech hinted that there was some underlying current going on as well. As they screamed at each other to back off of different territories, the humans, a newcomer, just sat there in a pressed and dressed uniform with several shiny medals on its chest, looking not confused, but almost apathetic to the whole situation. Eventually, the two species who had been going at each other eventually declared war on each other that same day and began to draw lines and also try to make allies. They reached out. As it was galactic law, they had to claim who was on their side and who wasn't. During this time, the newcomers were all hesitant to join, as those who were new to the galactic as a whole were not ready for a battle or a war on this level. When it came time to choose the humans, the Grit decided that they would choose the humans, even though they were barely on the edge of their own territory and would not be able to bring too much to bear. The Miata decided that they would laugh at the humans and insulted the human commander as he sat there, and that was the first time the humans ever showed any emotion, at least to any of us. The humans stood up, looked that feline in the eyes, and simply stated, "All right, let's do this," and then turned to his more reptilian ally. Though the reptile was almost mistakable for human except for the darker green hue to it and the lack of body hair. Of course, the eyes were different too. It was still easy to tell the two apart. However, they almost never had any commerce with each other up to this point. As the feline laughed at the idea of these primates who barely had entered the galactic as a whole less than 20 of their own solar cycles or years ago, they didn't believe the humans had anything that they could bring to the table except for maybe some logistical support. The feline laughed as the human exited the room with his reptilian counterpart, screaming how they would simply enslave the poor monkeys and force them to work in their minds, as it was too low of a job for them. The human gave a gesture on the way out the door, an oddly human gesture. He did not turn and look. He simply raised his hand up high over his head, with his palm closed and the back of the palm facing his new feline adversary. And before the door closed, his middle finger raised to the sky. This confused everyone because they had no idea what the gesture meant, but they would soon find out. At first, the war seemed to be going in the felines' favor, as they could easily outmatch their lizard counterparts in numbers and quickly sweep into an area and push them back to another system, another sector, another star. It looked as though the war would be over rather quickly, but then there was a stall, a major stall. The felines couldn't help but realize that their supply lines were suddenly slowing down. Reports were coming in of ships being destroyed halfway. They would simply blow apart, seemingly a torpedo launched from nowhere, or a railgun round would suddenly come through and pierce through the ship, severing the engine coils or simply blowing the ship up in the process. They didn't understand what was going on, and whenever they turned and tried to engage in that same direction, another shot would come from another completely different direction. They didn't know where it was coming from. They would see a slight ping on their radar and their LiDAR and any other sensor they had, but then it would just simply disappear. They couldn't figure out what was going on, but it was making it more and more difficult to keep their supply lines safe. They had to divert more and more of their own warships to the supply routes, which hampered their advance, which gave the lizards and their allies a chance to regroup. It wasn't long before they realized someone had been severing the supply lines, but who was it? And how? How would they know how to do this? How would they understand warfare so well? It wasn't long before they realized, when they got one single good look at the one ship that had fired. It had not only fired, but it fired an entire full salvo of 14 torpedoes and 6 railguns. Then it turned and moved away. As the convoy escorts went and chased it, it fired its rear torpedoes at them, forcing them to maneuver away and fight their way through. The point defense systems did their job, but it was enough time for this ship to disappear. But then they soon realized that they had pulled their escorts out of position. 2 others fired from the other side of the convoy, and as the freighters started to bob and weave, venting atmospheres, they were struck or simply blowing apart. The escorts tried to reposition. As they did, those that had fired disappeared as they ran off into the darkness of space. It was difficult, if not impossible, to get an active search on them. And then as the escorts got to the position, another direction, 2, 3, 4 more, and this harassment continued all the way through the sector. Whenever they were out of FTL speed, they would be hit, and at least 2, 3, 4, sometimes 50% or better of their ships were damaged or destroyed, personnel lost, tonnage scattered across the system. This meant they would have to divert more resources to gather everything up, and these resources, these ships, had to be protected, which drew even more of them off the front lines, which again stalled the invasion and the advance long enough for the lizards and their allies to counterattack. And counterattack they did. The felines had to withdraw as they were running short on supplies, not only things like weapons and ammo, but they also were running short on medical supplies and food. They had to leave the systems. And as they pulled back, their supply ships still did not arrive, or if they did, they were in ragtag pieces, many of them with holes busted from one side to the other. Their command got together and they saw the one readout of the one ship they were able to scan. It was human. How had the humans developed such stealth technology that they could not be seen in the blackness of space? Normally any device, any meteor, any hunk of rock, solar flare, space debris, or anything is easily picked up, but somehow these humans had figured out how to block the sensors so they could not be detected unless they fired. Even then, they were only detectable for a short amount of time as the heat corona burst up against the ship itself. And then there was the tactics. They would hit from one side, drawing everyone away, then fire again, and the escorts would either have to hold position and just take the hits and fire randomly into the darkness of space, trying to hit their target, or they could attempt to run them down, but that would leave the convoy vulnerable to further attack. And this is what they wanted. This pack of humans, this wolf pack of humans, would be absolutely devastating to anyone they came across, even the occasional warship. However, it wasn't until these ships, this wolf pack of ships, was able to sneak in close to the spaceports and the dockyards and fire directly into them, putting them out of commission for several months until they were back up to 100% capacity, and then disappearing into the blackness of space, that the felines realized they might have screwed up. They began to sue for peace, and talks began immediately. This time, next to their reptilian allies, the humans stood proud, as they were now in a place of honor and fully respected by everyone in the Galactic Council. During the talks, the felines turned to the humans and asked, "Where did you possibly learn how to fight like that?" The human smiled at him, pulled out his data pad, and said, Well, Ambassador, let me fill you in on a little bit of Terran history. Smiling, he tapped a few buttons on his data pad, and an image rose up of an ancient human submersible. And with a few movements of his hand, he rotated and expanded what the image was seeing. Not only was there the submarine, but several other obvious surface ships on it. The tag above the surface ships read Convoy 92.